Hello again in our third and last podcast about the treatment of sin in the Scarlet Letter and its implication in relation to Nathaniel Hawthorne's stance vis-a-vis Puritanism. We are going to study how through the idea of sin or through a specific treatment of the idea of sin in the Scarlet Letter or the element of sin, we can distinguish some sort of doubleness between Hester Prynne, the protagonist, the romantic heroine of the Scarlet Letter, and Nathaniel Hawthorne himself. And then we are going to use this last bit of the treatment of sin in the Scarlet Letter to announce our next lecture, which is about the romantic qualities of Hester Prynne as a romantic hero or a heroine. As an artist and author, Nathaniel Hawthorne comes before the public, that is, he faces the public to condemn the sins of the last generation and to project his own fulfillment, right? Here I take you back to podcast 2, in which we talked about the idea of ancestral sin that generates some sense of ancestral guilt. The Custom House, which is a chapter in the Scarlet Letter, which is more like a prologue by Nathaniel Hawthorne. So both Hawthorne and Hester Prynne can be seen as a signifier, that is, someone who signifies both pride and shame, achievement and alienation. At the same time, Hester is ashamed because of her adulterous relationship and proud of her rebellion and of the fact that she has followed her heart. The same thing with Hawthorne. He is both ashamed, yet proud. The Scarlet Letter is also about achievement and alienation, both for Hester Prynne and for Nathaniel Hawthorne. Hester is happy, that she has pearled, that she has achieved something, that she has reached a new sense of faith and spirituality, that she has managed to survive, etc. But at the same time, she is alienated. She is made strange in her own homeland. She lives on the border. She does not mingle with the members of the congregation. And most importantly, she wears the letter A, the Scarlet Letter, on her chest for her entire life. So though Hester's sin is never openly announced, the text cleverly alludes to adultery and adulteration throughout, creating a kind of fetishistic fascination with this nameless crime. So let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at the meaning of adultery, maybe, and why did Nathaniel Hawthorne chose adultery as a sin. He could have chosen anything else, killing, stealing, etc. But why adultery? In his book, Adultery and the Novel, Tony Tanner asserts that the adulteress represents the violation of the social contract and the harmonic interrelation of clearly defined roles. That is, the adulteress, the female adulterer, the adulteress, breaks any supposedly existing harmony between different social roles. He says, the figure of the wife ideally contains the biological female, the obedient daughter, and perhaps sister, the faithful maid, the responsible mother, and the believing Christian, and harmonizes all patterns that bestow upon her these different identities. So supposedly, in a wife, these different identities are existing harmoniously and there is a perfect balance between them. He continues then, But if the marriage starts to founder, then the different identities and roles fall apart or come into conflict. It is now perhaps clear why adultery should be the main, if the undescribed topic for the bourgeois novel. So, adultery plays an important role in many novels because it disrupts the harmony or the supposed harmony, the said so harmony in any given society. Hester here, as I told you, shame and pride, achievement and alienation. She is a liminal character. Liminal, it means in between. Liminality means in-betweenness, that is between two things. So Hester is indeed a liminal character that is caught between these social roles that we were talking about. As a result, between her passionate transgression, her passionate sin, her sin of passion. And that liminality is actually clear in the novel because it is represented by her marginality. Even, where she lives, her dwelling is located in the border between the city and the forest. So she's not really part of the city, and she's not really, or part of the town, and she's not really part of the forest. So where is she? Her dwelling is located between the urban and the wild. Maybe like all Americans at that period of time, maybe like all romantics, but still the idea I want to stress here is the fact that she is a liminal character. Furthermore, in addition to that, she struggles to meet the social demands of her social role because on the one hand, she's a mother and she is expected to act like a mother. On the other hand, she's an adulterous woman. She's expected to act like an adulterous woman, that is to sink herself in shame. So the psychological traumas of Hester, they result from her sin. But more specifically, they result from her confused desire to fulfill those social obligations. On the one hand, she attempts to be a good wife and a mother, and on the other hand, she is an adulteress. Why am I talking about this? Because these elements are also present in Hawthorne. In the Custom House, Hawthorne also suffers from a crisis of mediation between himself and society. He struggles to keep in balance the conflicting social roles that he has. On the one hand, he is a public man, and on the other hand, he is an author, And authors, the early days America, they are not really, especially romantic authors, they were not as celebrated as they are today. So, my conclusion here, and by the way, this might seem a little far-fetched, you may not agree, it's totally fine. The most important thing is that in your exam, when you talk about an idea, you argument. So what we can say here is that adultery as a sin is a metaphor for the act of writing as a sin. Hester's sin is adultery. Hawthorne's sin is writing this novel that at the same time celebrates yet condemns his ancestors. It's a beautiful sin. It's a didactic sin. It's a sin that he learns from, exactly like Hester Prynne. Now I'm going to delve more into this idea by exploring two other ideas or sub-ideas, if you want to say so. First, the metaphor of sex and creativity. That is, the metaphor of sex and creativity that allows us to see Nathaniel Hawthorne and Hester Prynne as doubles of each other. And two, the metaphor of birth and creativity that also allows us to see Nathaniel Hawthorne and Hester Prynne as doubles of each other. So in addition to, let's start with the first one, the metaphor of sex and creativity. In addition to transgression social norms or social contract and defined social roles, adultery openly announces sexual desire, pleasure, which is not really, how sex was perceived in the 19th century, as only for procreation. So, in the Scarlet Letter, this sexual passion or this sexuality of Hester is indirectly expressed through many things. Her, for example, the scene where she exposes or where she releases her hair, and she's described to us as a very sexy and passionate woman. In that scene, for example, the reader recognizes, the complex art of representing her as a passionate character or a sexual character. This is in relation to Hester, okay? Now let's move on to Hawthorne. In one of his letters to his lover, Sophia, Hawthorne describes his creative activity, that is his writing. He gives it a sexual metaphor. He tells Sophia, "Dearest, would it be unreasonable for me to ask you to manage my share of the correspondence as well as your own?" And then he says, be careful here, "to throw yourself into my heart and make it gush out with more warmth and freedom than my own pen can avail to do." In this very sentence, there is an implied connection between sexual love and verbal expression. Verbal expression here meaning the act of writing, which is a pleasurable, passionate act, and it is also a transgression, exactly like the sexual act that Hester embarks on in the Scarlet Letter. The second element I want to explore in relation to the doubleness, or Hester Prynne and Nathaniel Hawthorne as doubles of each other, still in relation to the element of sin in the novel, through the metaphor of birth and creativity, okay? In her article, The Parabolic Ploys of the Scarlet Letter, Zelda Bronstein says, "Like Pearl, the Scarlet Letter issues from an illicit union of an artist and a public man." I love this article by Bronstein, because she explores how, just like Pearl is Hester Prynne's illicit daughter, the Scarlet Letter is also Nathaniel Hawthorne's illicit daughter, in a sense. Because they both share this, both Pearl, the daughter, and the Scarlet Letter, and the Scarlet Letter itself are the products of a beautiful, passionate act of transgression. In the first, it is a sexual act, and in the second, it is the act of writing. So here, what we can say is that the metaphor of birth, giving birth to a child, is reminiscent of Hawthorne's perception of his act of writing, because in his short story, The Artist of the Beautiful, The Artist of the Beautiful, he articulates a clear connection between the act of writing and procreation, or the act of writing or the act of giving birth. So what we can say here is that Hester Prynne and Nathaniel Hawthorne are mirror images of each other, are doubles of each other, first through the act of passionate sex, or the act of creativity and passionate writing, and second, through the act of birth, and also, which is also the act of writing or the act of creativity. And this doubleness between Nathaniel Hawthorne and Hester Prynne is epitomized in the way Hawthorne himself describes Hester and her romantic qualities, as a romantic hero or as a heroine. About Hester, she writes the following. She had in her nature a rich, voluptuous, oriental character, a taste for the gorgeously beautiful, which, save in the exquisite productions of her needle, found nothing else in all the possibilities of her life to exercise itself upon. This passage, as you may notice, which is describing, by the way, Hester's sewing, carefully balances the word voluptuous and the word exquisite, the passional against the refined, which suggests a complex understanding. If sewing was a metaphor for writing, this very description of the act of sewing in the Scarlet Letter suggests a complex understanding of authorial creativity, okay? In her book, The Shape of Hawthorne's Career, Nina Baim wrote about Hester as an artist, or Hester Prynne as an artist. She says, "In a society that does not recognize and provide forms for imaginative expression, the artist of the private must always make her statement covertly by distorting the available public forms of expression. The executed product therefore involves a compromise, sometimes a very radical one. Maybe here it's also the compromise that Nathaniel Hawthorne had to do in order to survive as an author. Okay? The executed product, the sewed cloth in Hester's case, and the novels of Hawthorne in Hawthorne's case. So the executed product, therefore, involves a compromise, sometimes a very radical one, between the conception and its final shape. In the interplay between Pearl and the letter, Hawthorne and Hester, now this is the important part, Hawthorne and Hester both wrestle, struggle with the problem of bringing together the artist's idea, which is non-social and even non-verbal, and the eventual product. In other ways, both Hester Prynne and Nathaniel Hawthorne, to survive in the marketplace, في السوق معناتها في السوق متاع الكتابة in Hawthorne's case, and the actual marketplace in Hester's case in the Scarlet Letter. So both of them, the author and the adulteress, must compromise, لازمهم يتنازلوا, and must balance. They need to create a balance between the internal vision and the external form. This is why, even though Hester Prynne is a rebellious, romantic, amazing character, she still hides and she still wears the letter. She doesn't take it off. In the same way, Hawthorne probably has made also some compromises in writing the Scarlet Letter, and this is something that can be seen in the Custom House, in which he describes his ancestors frowning upon him, almost looking at him with anger. In his book, The Sins of the Fathers, Hawthorne's psychological themes, this is, where I want to go with all of this, is that it's a big personal trauma that is intertwined with a nationalist trauma. So in his book, The Sins of the Father, Hawthorne's psychological themes, Frederick Crews, the writer of the book, obviously the author of the book, observed, quote, "Even for the most bounteously passionate of Hawthorne's characters, art and guilt are intertwined, mixed almost, not mixed, but sewed together, or woven together, مخيطين في بعضهم متشعبين. Yeah, that's the word, intertwined. In the Scarlet, so here, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to reach with this lecture. This idea of sin and guilt that is, that through its treatment, we manage to see the Scarlet Letter as both a continuation. It's a 19th century novel, so we see it as both a continuation of 16th century Puritanism and at the same time a condemnation of 16th century Puritanism. The Scarlet Letter registers the sense of guilt because even though Hester, has an appeal for her heroism, for her endurance, for her daring, as a romantic hero or as a romantic heroine, she remains a censored figure, censurée. Voiceless. She almost remains a voiceless figure, not only by the surrounding characters like Dimmesdale and Shillingworth and the rest of the congregation, but also by the narrator himself. He doesn't really give a lot of space for her to talk, to express herself. This censor issues from Hawthorne's complex filial piety, F-I-L-I-O-P I-E-T-Y. Again, this idea is from Crewe's book. And by filial piety, filius in Latin means son. Piety, respect, filial piety, that is the respect of the son of the father, the son's respect of the father in a sense. Because Hawthorne cannot really point his finger at his ancestors, so he struggles with actually giving a voice to his character. He struggles with actually giving a space of expression to his character. So this filial piety is basically the dutiful respect to the fathers, and it is an important virtue and a primary virtue of respect, obedience, and care for the ancestors, the parents, the elderly family members, anyone who's basically, older than you, all boomers basically. Not only does he relish the difference between himself as a writer of storybooks and his ancestors, but also he acknowledges the correspondences. That is, he distances himself so much from the Puritans, but yet, what is this? But yet? Sorry, never use but and yet in the same sentence. So let me repeat again. He distances himself so much from his ancestors, the early Puritans, yet he cannot, he can only express himself by showing how organically linked he is to them. C'est comme s'il a fait un tour de 360 degrés باش يبعد عليهم, and then he finds himself sitting right sitting next to them. This is beautiful. I mean, honestly, as a person, I'm not really fond of Hawthorne, but I just think that, of course, Scarlet Letter is one of the classics that for second year students, it should be taught. But I love this element in it, because I think that Hawthorne basically is all of us. He's what we feel in relation to our culture, to our ancestors, to the mistakes that our ancestors have done in the past, to the way we see it the present and the way we see the future. What I would like you to keep in mind here from this doubleness between Hester and Hawthorne is that Hester comes to provide a new conception of the romantic artist. And at the same time, Hawthorne, who is a romantic artist, he continues to struggle with the latest demons of his artistic guilt. Like, am I Puritan enough? Am I not? And here we find Puritanism and Romanticism struggling with each other and yet complementing each other, giving us this interesting book, to be honest, because it's not flat. It's not 100% one thing, and it's not 100% the opposite thing. It's both and nothing at the same time. So for next time, we are going to delve into this idea of the romantic hero and the romantic artist, taking as a starting point the doubleness between Hester Prynne and Nathaniel Hawthorne. So maybe read a little bit about that. I can provide you with an article, Hawthorne and Romanticism, and I will give you like maybe 2 or 3 days before uploading the following podcast. If we were in class, I would have said thank you very much for coming to my class, but thank you very much for listening to me, for taking the time. I hope that you have enjoyed it, even though it's, I don't think so. I'm sorry, but this is going to be part of your preparation for your final exam. And if you have any question, if something is not clear in this podcast, please write a comment in the comment section below and I will make sure to answer it. Or write an email, send me an email, and I will make sure to answer that email as well. Those, of course, who could not listen to this, they will be provided with a hard copy the first week we're back to class. Thank you very much again. Now I'm heading to the kitchen to get my dinner ready. And yes, hopefully see you on May 19th. Yeah, that's it. See you on May 19th. Have a good evening, day, whatever. Bye.